Welcome to Serious Talk, Salesforce at Scale. I'm your host, Greg Banks. Thanks for joining us today. Here's a claim you're going to hear in this episode. The best measure of AI on a delivery team is not what it writes for you, it's what it's not allowed to do without you. That line belongs to 𝗪𝘂𝗧𝗏, a senior consultant here at Cirrius Solutions. Some of you met this Air Force veteran on Serious Talk, 𝗪𝘂𝗧𝗏 Minute. Today, he's running AI agents inside live client delivery. And 𝗪𝘂𝗧𝗏, our delivery director, joins as my co-host. We get practical about where the hard stop sits between what an agent drafts and what a human approves, how an org health check compresses weeks of grind into a day, and what's actually left for a business analyst to do when the machine's doing all the typing. Let's get into it. All right, welcome to Serious Talk, Salesforce at Scale. Got Al standing in as a co-host today. Good to have you back, Al.
Absolutely.
And got a trifecta here today. We actually have a veteran who has spoken about AI here to talk about Salesforce today. So Greg may wander off on topic today because we're bouncing between the theme of three different series. But 𝗪𝘂𝗧𝗏 has been with us before. He's a senior consultant here at Cirrius. You may have caught him on the Military Minute last fall. He's one of our, I think around episode 15 or so, one of our earliest guests. And from his backstory, he enlisted in the Air Force at 17, had to bribe his mom to go sign some papers to let him get in under the radar of the 18 requirement. Spent about 14 years on active duty working aircraft arresting systems and emergency power, and then finished his career as a drill instructor. I still can't get the picture out of my head there, Nick. We'll probably dig into that at some point, let you yell some AI commands at us. But on that episode about a year ago, you made this statement. AI transforms what a consultant does, but it doesn't replace the human element because you still have to give it the context. And we're going to get to that in just a moment. But a year later, he's actually the guy running AI agents inside live client delivery. His own framing of it is this: I don't measure AI by what it writes for me. I measure by what it's not allowed to do without me. So today, we're going to get into what those agents are allowed to do, what they're never allowed to do, and what's actually left for a business analyst when the machine's doing the typing. Nick, welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
So let's go back to your first statement. AI doesn't replace you. You still got to, the human element's got to be there, that human in the loop. I feel like we've had a lot of statements on the AI topic here over the last year. I feel like that one's aged about as well as any statement could have.
Right. Yeah, no, I think so. I think if anything, it's enhanced it from what it's been previously. Now it's even more important to have that human in the loop, as we like to say, consistently have somebody there to verify what's going on, what we're going to be implementing potentially, what we're going to be drafting. The ability to have somebody to review it with knowledge is more important than ever, because if you just go in for any of these AI models and say, go and build something, no mistakes, it's just going to do it. And it's not going to really have the guardrails that we're looking for. And the product's going to suffer because of it.
Completely. Well, we're going to jump into this, but just to kind of set the stage for those who might not have been privy to the earliest episode, tell me just a little bit about your off-ramp out of the Air Force and how exactly did you wind up over in the Salesforce ecosystem here at Cirrius?
Yeah, it's a part of the Hiring Our Heroes program. I started that journey about, I want to say, into 2022, going into 2023. Ended up getting an internship after that. There's an interview process, got selected, was able to get paired up here with Cirrius, and then eventually was hired on full time. I made a decision sometime in 2022 that I wanted to be home more often and saw an opportunity to join Salesforce. And yeah, that's how I ended up at Cirrius.
Fantastic. I was honestly doing research for this, and I couldn't remember exactly which cohort you came to, but I look back and I'm like, in some ways that feels like 10 years ago. In some ways it feels like 30 minutes.
Right.
But 3.5 years you've been in this ecosystem, and I don't think the ecosystem looks even remotely. Hell, the products don't even have the same name they did when you got here. It has changed a lot.
Completely agree. I mean, what I was doing even in the beginning stages was very much pulling up a Google document and writing user stories on a document line by line, and then taking it somewhere else and reviewing it. So the day-to-day work that was being done, especially from an artifact level, is night and day different from what I'm doing today.
No doubt. No doubt. So you passed the statement to me, kind of getting ready for today. You made the statement, I don't measure AI by what it writes for me. Right. I think what you just described of it, manually writing user stories to what it's doing for you now. I measure it by what it's not allowed to do without me. Explain that statement and let's begin unpacking. You sit in the role as a senior consultant, but you do a lot of BA work. You do a lot of translating what the client says they want into what that actually means when it comes to putting it into a Salesforce product. But help us get into that and unpack that statement.
Yeah, I think the main things that come to mind when I think of like, hey, what can it do? Analyze, compare the differences for things, maybe potentially draft information, pull things together, investigate a little bit. But where the hard stop goes is where there needs to be a human review before something's actually implemented, especially when we're talking like a production org, right? So if there's things that we can review that need to be done that can potentially have any kind of negative effects on a client, we want to stop that and have that person kind of come back in and verify what's being done prior to explicitly allowing that thing to happen. Traditionally, it'd be something like a deployment. We would review what's being deployed, seeing what the contingencies are, what files potentially are going to be attached to that deployment, and then reviewing it ourselves. We're doing the same thing with anything related to AI as well. Before anything's really executed, we are reviewing it before we get into that.
Fair enough. Yeah, honestly, I'm just trying to think about what it looked like 3.5 years ago. What it looked like a year ago when we started getting access to AI and how we were using it. And the way I describe it to people is like, to me, AI felt like enhanced Google a year ago. like I've got this tool and it's way smarter than just going to Google, but we didn't have context. We didn't have prompts written. We didn't have all these artifacts to ground. We certainly didn't have an agent like we leverage today. So if you look back what you're doing then, it reminds me of having ADD in a meeting 10 years ago. Like if somebody was here taking notes for me, I could actually start multitasking and getting some stuff done. So now we've got transcription. We've got agents that transcribe and translate that into user stories, doing all that stuff. So the dream has become a reality really quick. Great job of painting that. Let's get to the meat of it. So one of the topics here we talked about is running AI inside delivery. So you're on one of our delivery teams. Al's our delivery director here at Cirrius, manages all the pods that deliver projects. Day in the life of is probably not the way to state this because no two are the same. But I think in terms of how you approach what you do in that job, certainly probably has a little better definition because now I can offload those things that were typically more abstract, from transcriptions to writing user stories to even writing test scripts. AI can handle almost all of that now that we've taken the time to build that stuff into it. But why don't you kind of start painting that picture? What does that look like in your role, and how does it impact your team?
Yeah, so I guess for my role, at least when I come in every day, I have a skill, I will say, that basically gives me a summary of the things I did previously that day before. And I have it email it to myself. I prefer it to read it that way. And then I have here's a list of items to start today. So it's looking at our project management system. It's looking at potential emails that I've received, messages that I've got from other individuals. And then based on its own analysis and learning over time, it kind of says, hey, here's the 5 things that I think you should do first thing today. Somebody emailed you after hours. I think, hey, we got a question about this price book. We'll email this individual real quick so that we can be prepared for this 11 o'clock call. That's like the big bulk, I would say, for the first 30 minutes. And I would tell you previously in a previous life, going back to 2023, that's a couple hours worth of work that I'm doing now in 15 to 30 minutes at that point. That's my first launching pad. So, and one positive of that I will throw in there as well is that it allows me to go home at the end of the day knowing that when I come to work tomorrow, I can turn the switch on without having to wonder, hey, what am I doing tomorrow? When I show up the next day, I have that summary ready to roll and I can review it just to verify that it's accurate. But as I've been iterating it, it's been pretty much spot on so that I know what I'm doing. It allows me to be prepared for calls. And again, it's a lot of what I'm doing now is I go down that list and it's, hey, I have a call in 2 hours. I have some kind of prep that I need to do. I run the agent and we start generating a test script. Maybe I prep some items, get some things ready to have that environment ready. And then I move on to the next task. It's basically rinse and repeat throughout my day now, essentially, with all that.
Absolutely. I would say the key difference in workflow that we're really seeing with this AI usage is that multitasking was always like something everybody says, oh yeah, I can do that. But realistically, you're working one task at a time. And it's like to shift context from one thing to another it's a huge overhead. Like shifting from one kind of like maybe a build task to going into discovery, different client, it's so much to keep track of that just the process of shifting your mindset into a different task took time. Yeah, you might spend 30 minutes reorienting yourself with a task. Now, I mean, realistically, I can have 5 to 6 different sessions running within Claude Code that have different tasks that are ongoing, and each one of them is alive at that moment. And it's constantly being iterated on as it goes through and understands what I need and understands what the next steps are. I can provide a few comments, switch to another one, and keep going. And then while all of those are running, I'm doing another task on top of that. So like truly, it's like we're running multi-threaded now, and we're moving multiple initiatives forward in a way that just wasn't possible. You just really couldn't do that in the past. So it is, it's definitely a very big change in just the core way that we operate that was not realistic in the past.
Yeah, I completely agree, Al. It feels like our multitasking is now multitasking, right? So before I couldn't even keep my own thoughts in order, but now as fast as I can throw them, I can literally distribute not just to an agent, but to an agent who's prepared to delegate them to sub agents and go run those things. And while it's doing that, this is typically how my brain works. So now we have technology that's finally caught up with a brain that can't stay on topic. Is if I can think of 4 things and I can feed them in a logical way to my agent, then those all can be progressed at the same time, allowing me to focus and make progress on multiple fronts at the same time. The power of what one person's able to do is multiplied exponentially. So Nick, maybe we take one phase like discovery or POCs, which we've done an episode talking about that here. So now you basically have taken the harder parts of a project, done proof of concept. So those things that used to loom over your head saying, I really hope the client understands this. And before they wouldn't see it necessarily to UAT, but now you've worked through some of that stuff with POCs. So you've vetted out some ideas. You've taken this transcription, for lack of a better term, like this written element that represents the user stories for the client. You fed it into a POC. So the agent's already heard it. It already knows what that tactically needs to look like. And it actually does know what Salesforce is as well, because we've worked with it. What does it look like to go from that towards actually starting to set up a project for a client? How do you kind of get to that next phase?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it can kind of happen at the same time while we're doing this now. So as you get to a certain part of a POC, for example, the BA hat is still going on throughout that entire process. As you're still going to receive feedback, you're still going to be eliciting questions. You're still going to be trying to drill in to make sure that it's fitting their requirements. That way, when we get into those UAT parts of the project, we're closing off any big gaps that are not showing up at the latest hour possible with all of that. But in terms of like transitioning to the next part of a project, to me, it's going to be continuous. You could still be at a certain process. Using an example, like we're looking at something in field service, but we're already done with sales. So we can start getting things pen on paper, so to speak, as in we're generating things, getting user stories approved. We're able to get past the discovery phase of one section without having to wait as often as we did previously. Because sometimes, especially when we're talking about BA, maybe it's 1 or 2 individuals that are doing both of those processes at the same time. And if they're on calls and they're trying to lead discovery for one process, maybe the work that needs to be done for the user stories of a previous process is stale. And now you're relying on the human memory to kind of come back and make sure your information is accurate.
Yeah. And I know we're not going to get into the whole agile concept here, but we kind of did agile in a waterfall way, right?
Right.
We did all the discovery and then all the user story readback and then all the development, then all the testing. The only thing we really did in an agile fashion was build a little, show a little, build a little, show a little. The problem is you may have got a user story 5 months ago. Hopefully that person's still here. Even more importantly, if they are, you hope if they remember what it is that they said.
Right.
So if I'm tracking right, correct me if I'm wrong, but now we kind of do discovery on sales, if you will. We can POC anything, move rapidly through kind of getting sign off or buy into what the sales part of that is. And then we can turn our agent loose, actually starting to set that up while we start moving towards discovery of field service or whatever the next part might be. And the idea there is now I can take a finished configured product in Salesforce back to the person that saw it in probably half the time, if not less than before, because now I've got this agent that I can hand stuff off to and who can do these things exponentially faster. Yeah.
That's pretty much spot on. Another part of that too is the ability to have, previously you would have somebody maybe on a call taking notes, and then you have somebody leading the call as well. Now, the amount of resources that you have to tie for these certain processes can be reduced and allow other individuals to kind of work on the things that are already approved. So it's the exact same thing like what you're saying. Like we're doing one thing, it's already been approved, something is in the past. Now we can start working on it. The agents can start getting these user stories down, ready to be reviewed by that human before anything is committed at that point.
And I'm just thinking over the time when I managed a team, there were certain things in a project that just inevitably took just gargantuan amount of time. When you're setting up a brand new org, like it's installing field services, doing a lot of those just really routine, monotonous, laborious things to set it up that eats an absolute ton of time. And really to the client doesn't feel like a whole lot of value because all they know is now I see something called field service on the screen. I don't know what that means, but it's there. Now we can literally hand most of that off. The other part that to me took an awful lot of time. We're not always setting up new orgs. Quite often we're engaging with a client. Either we did a phase a year ago and we're coming back and doing another phase now, or somebody else set it up and they've hired us to take that and go enhance it, go add something else to it. So in that scenario, if you're coming in behind and somebody else set it up, but we're having to build on that foundation and go from there, I'm not going to put a 12-story building on a foundation that I haven't had inspected. I need to know what's in this thing. So describe a little bit what that looks like. I mean, I would call this the grind, right? These are the things that you put on your headset, you turn the phone on do not disturb, and you just go heads down for hours and hours, if not days, digging into that stuff. How do you approach that now? What is AI doing for you there?
Yeah, I mean, now you're utilizing a skill, for example, to basically go in there and triage or analyze the system from a structural level, right? Like, hey, I want to know what their data situations looks like. How many automations do they have? The different objects that are tied to those automations, right? So like, are they building in best practice? What things are falling outside of it that are causing inefficiencies? What security risks do we have? And then depending on what your skill is set up or how it's set up, you can apply a very plain language way of saying, hey, this is a red alert, this is green, we can keep going. And then you can start prioritizing the level of things that we need to attack quicker, much faster than we would ever be able to do on our own. Again, like you said, put your headphones in, listen to music, and look at this for 2 weeks when you can do a baseline in a day for a lot of these things, especially when we're talking about data storage, for example, things like that. You're able to see how much you have available or what's being used incorrectly, what type of users are in there, when's the last time they logged in, what kind of security we have. We're able to do that at a speed that's just not possible at the human level.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the important thing here is that this all sounds really fast and really easy, almost like too fast and too easy. But I think this is where the expertise aspect really comes in, because for any of this to work properly, we spend a lot of time building and refining skills to help these agents, to help these LLMs work better with the Salesforce platform and with our specific standards. Without those guardrails, the content you get back is maybe 25 or 50% viable. So you're actually taking a really big hit if you're just going straight out of the box. You really have to apply the expertise layer on top of this to build the skills that guide and provide the guardrails and the parameters. And then the expertise to go in and review the content, review the output, make sure it's correct, and be the guiding hand that makes the machine function the way it should. Without that guiding hand, you're kind of leaving the output to fate. And generally, if you don't know what you're looking for, you're not going to see the problems that exist. So you'll inherit large problems that only manifest later on down the line. So all of this has only made expertise of experienced consultants more valuable because they're needed to guide the tools in a way to actually deliver value and not to cause problems that become harder and harder to locate and work through over time.
Yeah, I saw a meme this morning on LinkedIn, and it showed like the stairs of progression in Salesforce land, from like getting in Trailhead, getting your first badge, to getting your admin cert, to getting advanced admin, whatever they're calling it today, whatever, like all these steps. And at the very, very top was Claude. And it was something to the effect, do you need an architect? And it says, no, my $20 a month Claude subscription is doing everything. It's like, we've kind of joked around here. It's like, we're going to need to have to build a whole series of agents that don't set Salesforce up. They go and troubleshoot what Claude did without guardrails, tore stuff up. How do we find it and fix it in a way that doesn't destroy customers? Because I had an episode with 𝗁𝘁𝗄𝘆 recently. She owns her own consultancy, and she had a statement that if you have a mess, AI just exposes and rapidly accelerates the rate at which that mess comes out. And that's a great way to say this. Andi Utkin used to say this about flows: if your process sucks and you automate it, you just get crap at a lot faster rate, right? This is very much true here, that it's not magic. You don't just go get a Claude account, point it at Salesforce, and it does everything, right? There's hundreds, if not thousands, of man hours at this point that's gone into building the guardrails, understanding our practice, understanding what we do with it. And some of it's because we do field service, things like that they're definitely atypical when it comes to declarative Salesforce setup. But all that said, if you ever hired somebody you really wanted to offload your skills to somebody, how painful that can be. If you've spent 10 years building knowledge, it takes a long time to hand that to somebody. You don't just sit down and put something in your ear and your agent all of a sudden knows it. You got to take some time to set that dude up and really give him success. So what I hear you two describing is we've done the homework, right? We've done this knowledge transfer. We've appropriately created boundaries that stop dumb things from happening and put check stops at places where it would be easy to misinterpret, or there might be more than one way to go, and you just really want to have that freedom to make the hard decision, because that's going to ultimately affect the next 10 steps, and you can't afford to go wrong there. So all of these things have been taken into account into how we've set things up, but it definitely has impacted what a day in the life of any given consultant might be doing here at Cirrius when it comes to a Salesforce implementation.
Yeah, there's definitely no confusion with the idea that when this first came about, you were putting in a little bit of extra time on top of delivering the actual work that you're kind of hired to do to make this a lot easier, going through the trials of it, right? So iterating on any of the issues you may have and then making it better over time. So eventually you do get to a point, like I said, I'm using my email example, to where my end of day email that gets sent to me is actually useful. Because the first, I would say 3 weeks, it was just gibberish. Like it didn't make any sense. I was kind of getting a little frustrated. I'm like, I can do better than this. And then I continually provided my expertise, something that only I can really do at that point. What works for me, what works for my team, continually enhance it, improve it. And now I'm at a point where it works exactly where it needs to be. But it's not something that's just like, hey, Claude, tell me how my end of day went. Go. Like you're not going to get a result that you want. It's going to do it, but in a way that is not sufficient or efficient of your time.
Right. It doesn't, it's not terribly indifferent to the iterations we saw with meeting transcription tools, right? I remember some of the earliest tools we got, like you got a transcript, but it was like somebody just put their hand on the keyboard and held it down, right? They didn't say who said what. It didn't tell you when it was speaker 1 or speaker 2. You had to listen so hard and remember things to go back and like control and find who said that? What was that? What did they say? Like it wasn't useless, but it was pretty close to it. So yeah, I mean, that's a really good visualization of how some of this technology's evolved. So when you talk about getting inside of an org, we talk this series Salesforce at scale. If you have Salesforce, it's pretty much a written guarantee. You didn't spend the money to get this tool to set something up and it stays that way forever. You're going to grow. You're going to buy a company. You're going to expand your product line. You're going to hire more people, whatever. You're going to scale. Scale implies that you've done the right things at the foundation level, that you can keep adding to them, and the house is not going to crumble. You're not have to go back down the foundation, wipe it again, and start. To scale this up is probably one of the hardest things to do when we come in for a client that's already got something. What's one of the worst things you have found inside of a production org, either by your agent or otherwise, but you've used AI to kind of help work through some of that stuff?
Yeah. So for me, it's fairly recent. So I had went into an org eventually once I had kind of honed in on this analysis skill that I have to kind of see I call it a health check, but the health check that I had, this org essentially had a data table that was taking up about 48% of their storage, utilizing an automation that doesn't work, created by an administrator that is part of, if I remember correctly, 29 to 39 processes that is no longer there. So that individual, in theory, has access to their Salesforce org, had access at that time to their Salesforce org, and they no longer were employed there. But not only is that something that they built as a test in the wrong environment, meaning they were testing in production instead of using the preferred methods of a lower environment, a UAT, a dev org, they were doing their testing in production, thus wasting the amount of data that they had. Claude was able to find that in like 2 hours. And something like that, we would be able to identify that the data is at 48% from something, but it would take us significantly longer, even with our level of expertise, to figure out where that came from and trace down what part of that automation is doing that. So that's probably the worst thing I've seen. It's twofold, and it all came from one individual that's no longer at that company.
Talking about a legacy, right?
No, they're every part of them is there.
Salesforce used to ask me to come speak at Dreamforce, and I said, when y'all ready to get somebody on stage and talk about things not to do, I'm your guy.
Right.
This was back in my first 3 or 4 years in the ecosystem. Like you're just eking by, right? Trailhead didn't exist back then. Community didn't exist back then. So you were just trying to figure stuff out. But yeah, that's definitely a legacy you could leave out there for somebody to discover. What about from a deployment standpoint? Like we could talk about discovery, right? And I think everybody can appreciate simplifying that. We can even talk about some early config, maybe even analysis, because at the end of the day, those are consuming information and summarizing or translating something for you to consume and then maybe give it more direction on, but they feel benign. They feel less risky, for lack of a better way to say it. But I think we can all agree when it comes time to deploy to production, that is a different game. And this is, as consultants, as professionals, what we do here, that is one of the very last things that we trust somebody to do that comes on here. Like that you really need to have your ducks in a row and understand not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it. The word dependencies, things like that. It can't begin to overstate the criticality of some of that stuff. I know this is something you're doing now. I know you're using agents for deployments. How do you fundamentally approach deployments differently now that you have this? And how would you equate what you're seeing with that today versus what you used to have to do?
I mean, from a fundamental standpoint, or like from a way you're supposed to go about it, I don't believe it has changed. It's just the method of which you are doing it now. Because again, you still need to verify it, whether we're using the number of tools that are available out there, whether it's change sets, gear set, etc., you still have to verify the data, the metadata that you're going to potentially put into this org in that human role. Now, obviously, you're just using a different tool to do so. So the process is still in place. The dangers that you have now versus some of the stuff maybe using change set, for example, is that if you tell Claude, for example, like, hey, go deploy this, depending on your prior experience with it, it may just try to deploy it and not consider the side effects of it. And that's where, again, the ability for us to build out a skill that allows us to make sure that, like, hey, this is a deployment action. This means I need to come back into the loop and analyze this before we do anything with this. We need to see what's going in there. What risks do we have? And that's where AI really helps, though, is it can explain to us, hey, you're bringing in this automation into your Salesforce org. Here's the subsequent things inside of the org already existing that could potentially be affected. You can then go back to Claude and be like, hey, I'd like you to analyze this a little bit further and tell me what risk there is. And then you, as the expert that's in that seat, can apply the knowledge that you have for your experience and then decide whether or not this is the right route, navigate to something else, escalate it, etc.
I think as
Yeah, so
a
I
bit
feel
of
like
taste of the future, we're getting to a point where an agent is the best person to do DevOps because it is consistent. Across the board, it's doing things in a similar way all the time, which a DevOps process really relies on. So I think we're moving to a future where we'll be able to connect GitHub into the end org that we need to push everything into. As our agent is doing building, it's creating a manifest, it's loading things into this manifest, and ultimately GitHub is able to execute the final push of all of this metadata into a production org and really streamline that process end to end where we're tracking every single step of it rather than having to go through a third-party tool like GearSet, which is helpful for Harrison's sake, but for like a full greenfield implementation where we just need to get everything out of the sandbox,
Right.
put into this org, I think the structure ultimately is going to work really well for us. And it's going to be very, very smooth and shave off a lot of the rough edges that we deal with now, where you just have people forget to add data. There's fields that slip over time. Metadata types change and nobody updates that. And then going back and trying to understand the source of truth becomes really difficult the longer things slip by. So we are getting to a point where a lot of these processes for new implementation, pushing metadata out, is going to be so much easier than it is today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've described people before. If you've ever sat in a room with a consultant and they just keep asking questions, when I would onboard fellows and things back in the day here, I'd always tell them, they like, how do you know what to ask? I'm like, you have to embrace your inner toddler, right? Well, I want to do so-and-so. Why? Because it's going to do so-and-so. Why? Right? You want to understand all those things. And as consultants, professionals, we understand the idea behind the process. We understand why when you click this, it triggers this. We understand the hierarchy of how things fire and what fires first and what downstream effects and before save, after save, all those things. The client doesn't know that, doesn't need to know that. That's for us to know. But I having done hundreds of deployments over my lifetime, and I know you guys can relate, you don't even realize what you were doing without thinking, right? If you've done enough of these, you just remember to do this and then that and then that. And don't forget this and don't forget that. And after it's all deployed, you got to go do this. Don't forget to give the permissions. Otherwise, they don't see it. All those little things that, again, are not in a book. They're not things that you could just turn Claude loose and tell him to go do. And Claude's no better than any other automation. He's dumb. He's going to do exactly what you tell him to do unless you've trained him to ask questions, unless you've trained him to critically think, which is what we've spent the time doing. So as we age and you have kids that grow up and keep you up at night and whatever those things may look like, a person's going to make mistakes. But Al, you said it great. What I love here is how consistent this thing is. If I tell it 1 + 1 = 2, and you got to do this and this and this and this, it will very religiously, diligently follow those commands. And we can train it with that type of discipline. And the iteration, we've heard us talk about this on several episodes across multiple series here. When you iterate, what that means is if you think there's 10 steps, there's really 14. When you do 10 steps, the first 3 times it worked, the next time it doesn't, you iterate. You go back and you train it. All right, we need to move step 11 out. We need to insert a new 10, but whatever that may look like. It takes a lot to get to that place. I know Nick was one of the early adopters. I know before we really had rules on what we were doing, you were out there blazing your own trail trying to figure out, I just got a really cool freaking tool in my toolbox. And until I'm told otherwise, I'm going to find a way to do it. So I know you probably had some really early iterations on, I just want to work smarter. I want to find a way, if I'm going to show up and charge what consultants charge, I want to bring the maximum amount of value with the most discipline and least amount of mistakes as possible. And how can this tool help me do that? What's it turned into today is taking collective knowledge of our entire team and literally thousands of different pieces of inputs. And we've really honed that into a central skill that we can take it, collate it, and then redistribute it to our entire team so they all benefit from that collective knowledge is just things I didn't dream about 6 months ago. It's absolutely insane. So Nick, we started out the kind of the title of this episode will be doing BA in the AI world. Don't you love acronyms?
Yes.
I think we've established pretty well in this episode that a BA is not irrelevant. The job's not gone away, but somebody who aspires, got a young admin out there, junior admin, wants to grow up to be a BA one day. But if you had to give some advice to somebody on how to embrace what it is that's going on, what AI is doing for us to become an effective, powerful, high value BA in today's world, what's your advice?
Yeah, I think the main thing that I would talk about, especially in this AI world, is understanding your process, right? So if you previously, I would go back to kind of where I used to be. A lot of our time was spent doing artifacts, right? So creating a cool looking slide deck, making user stories on a Google document, training documents. Now that can be done at a very quick level, right? Like 95% of that can be done in minutes, and then 5% you're able to add your little touch to it. At this point, though, I still think a new BA or someone like that that's trying to aspire to becoming here, you still need to have that ability to understand the questions that need to be asked, right? So the analysis part of everything that you do is even more important now, especially because certain things are going to be automated without you necessarily handling it. So if you ask the right questions, identify client processes, shortfalls, gaps, etc., it's still going to make your life a lot easier. And if you lack those skills, when Claude goes in, for example, or another AI tool goes in and builds something, it's going to be missing the context as well. So it's going to expand the problem that you have, maybe more substantially than pre-AI with that.
Indeed. And the other thing I think it follows through on is, and Al can testify here, in a dream world where budgets are endless and timelines go on forever, right? In a dream world, you have all the time in the world to meet with the client, all the time in the world to test, to document, to go in and fill in the descriptions on every field, to define why a record type was used, where's this page layout used. You would take the time to articulate all that. Again, now, as a part of my agent coming out of discovery, if it says I need this field to do so-and-so, that was in my transcription, which went into my user story, which went into my definition, which my agent wrote into the field description. So I heard it one time and 7 or 8 downstream things that normally would require a person to think of, follow through, whatever. All that's now been done. And by the way, Claude, when you're done, write me a functional requirements document or write me a technical architecture summary. All of those things are in memory that we can tap from. So the value you're able to get time and time again. This does not take away, if anything, I would say it takes away 90% of the stuff you did do, but too talented is not the right word. It wasn't the best use of your time, maybe is the way of saying that. It offloads all that to an agent that can handle it. And now you're able to dedicate almost all of your focus to those critical things that your experience and your training has brought to the table. So it's an exciting time to be watching this. Again, I think a year and a half ago, we were all a little fearful what AI was going to show up and do. I think we're all still hoping the Terminator was just a movie, but where we're sitting today, man, it's truly kind of a dreamy place to watch it, because we've taken the time to build this stuff to really see what it's doing and coming in fruition. It's been fun to watch. Nick, you've been one of those out here blazing the trail. I appreciate you making time to come back. Al, thanks for the commentary here on it's. I know your job in particular. We probably ought to talk about how your job has changed since AI showed up, because it used to just be hundreds and hundreds of one-on-one conversations with team members of what are you hearing, what's it look like, don't forget about, and you were trying to coach, don't forget about. Mm-hmm. Now you don't necessarily have to do that because the agent's making up for that kind of stuff that you used to have to worry about. So really appreciate the guardrails you talk about there, because as a delivery director, at the end of the day, you got to be accountable, right? This is what consultants should do. We should be transparent. We should own our problems, good or bad, and make sure our clients are getting what they pay for. I think, in my opinion, what we're seeing now, what they're getting for what they're paying is exponentially higher value, because every I is dotted, every T is crossed. We're able to leverage the power of these tools to really polish up the things that we were already doing well, but now we can do it so much more efficiently. So gentlemen, thank you. Thanks for what you're doing and bringing some of us along that have been later adopters of it. Nick, thanks for coming around for round 2. I'll put a link to the first episode. Nick's, some of his original origin story of coming here is good stuff to hear. I would say give us a good 𝗂𝗄𝗄𝗪, but I think that's Army, not Air Force. I'm not even going to try and screw that up. But appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot. You'll have a great day.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Serious Talk Salesforce at Scale. Thanks for coming back around, Nick. Your org health tech story is going to stick with listeners. A data table eating 48% of a client's storage, tied to a broken automation by an ex-employee, built by testing and production, and your agent traced it down in about 2 hours. There's got to be a Dreamforce episode in here somewhere. You also didn't sugarcoat the work behind that. 3 weeks of gibberish end-of-day emails before your iteration turned into something you trust. Al, thank you for naming the part people skip past. Without the expertise layer and the guardrails your team builds, the output of these tools is maybe 25 to 50% viable. One truth ran through this entire conversation. AI earns its place on a delivery team through the boundaries and experience human draws around it. If this conversation resonated, it's because it's how we think about the work we do here at Cirrius. Our team builds and delivers Salesforce for organizations who care about getting it right, not just getting it live. If that's the kind of partner you're looking for, reach out. We'd love to talk. Check out the show notes for links from this episode, including Nick's first appearance on Serious Talk, the Military Minute. His origin story is worth a listen. If this episode was useful, subscribe and leave us a review. It genuinely helps the show find the right audience. Special thanks goes out to Jason Fowler for use of his song, Mystery Road. If you have questions or topics you want us to cover, email us at serioustalk@seriousssolutions.com. The address will be in the show notes. We'll catch you on the next one.